So if you're primarily looking at streaming, tickets, and core merchandise as your core products that are available in the market today, there are limits to the scale of that. It makes sense to think about how you give your super fans other products to buy from you so that you can engage them further and help create a more sustainable economy for yourself as an artist. Most artists are focused on getting their art out into the world, and while that's great, the reality is that there are lots of consumers that are out there that are making choices on what they want to listen to and what they want to engage with. And the strategy behind thinking like a business will think about what my audience is actually looking for, what do they want, what do they need, and then how do I serve that product to them in a way that's accessible, that's exciting, that's engaging, that wants them, that allows them to come into this world and purchase that thing. So talking about fandom, there's a big difference between casual fans and super fans, right? The casual fan that goes from discovering what you're doing into following you perhaps on social media or on a streaming platform into actually purchasing something from you. Their first point of entry or their first point of purchase is not the most exclusive, expensive product that you have. They also don't represent a high level of frequency until they're sort of further down into your world. So there's a clear difference between a casual fan who might purchase a ticket to one of your shows or purchase a vinyl record from you or a cassette or maybe a single piece of merchandise to somebody who wants access to a subscription product from you or who wants something very exclusive from you or is trying to get greater access to you directly as a part of their fandom, right? Like there's a different relationship in that exercise of their journey into becoming a fan. And there's a clear difference between a casual fan who decides to purchase maybe one thing and somebody who's looking at maybe they're going to buy everything that you offer. I do think, building a relationship with an audience is two directional, right? Like if I'm getting into a romantic relationship with somebody, if that relationship is primarily I talk at them, I give them things, and I expect them to love me in return, I'm gonna be in for a pretty harsh reality check at some point because I'm gonna get dumped and I'm gonna go, well, why don't they love me? It's one thing if you just ship them music on an ongoing basis and expect them to love what you're doing. But I think the market today has really conditioned the expectations of the fan that I'm expecting more engagement. I'm expecting more access. I want to see more of their world. And I think it's one thing to just let people in and film the behind the scenes. It's another thing to ask them questions. It's another thing to ask them for perspective. It's another thing to listen to the conversations that they are having and formulate the way in which you communicate and what you offer in response to that. In that case, it's a two-way relationship. And if I have a two-way relationship with somebody, the potential to go from like to love is high, right? I'm not going to necessarily fall in love with somebody just based on their looks, right? Maybe I'm going to fall in lust, but that's not love. And the reality is I need to form a relationship. I need to make sure that I'm getting what I need from that relationship as a fan in order to fall in love. Realistically, somebody buying something from you is an artifact of fandom, right? It's something that allows them to represent that they are a fan in your sphere, in your world, right? I'm the one that walks around with the XTC t-shirt and people don't know what XTC is or what that represents. But for me, that's like self-actualization of who I am, right? So this is an artifact of my fandom. If I'm thinking about what types of products or what types of things I want to try and sell, I need to think about what they're willing to buy, not just what I want to make. Because I could make a bunch of product and it could sit in a box in my garage and I could never sell any of it. So the reality is there has to be some dynamic between product and market fit. And I mean, as an artist, we just create art and put that out into the world with an assumption that there's an audience sort of ready to consume that. But just because I make music that sounds like Frank Ocean doesn't mean that Frank Ocean fans are going to like me. And just because Frank Ocean sells sweatshirts that look like this does not mean if I make a sweatshirt that looks like this, my audience that I already have is willing to transact, right? Like I'm going to need to think about what actually is the needs of my audience because maybe I do make music that sounds like Frank Ocean, but I live in a Caribbean climate. So sweatshirts are probably not a really good product for people that don't need to wear sweatshirts, So there's the reality of like the product that you're offering and the fit to the market. I talk about this a lot. I see artists that go out and sell beanies in the middle of summer. I'm like, it's probably a good product to wait until winter for, when people have a need, they're cold, they went to the show, they're like, actually, I could use a beanie. Now I buy a beanie from a merch stand from the artist that I support because they have a need, for that thing. So I think it's about thinking about the desire and the needs of your audience, thinking about the products that could fit those needs, and then starting with smaller quantities of those things to test the market, test the interest, see if it's there. If there's certain demand, then you can scale those opportunities from there. The music that we primarily release digitally today is hard to call a product as much anymore. It's starting to fall closer to what a music video has been historically for the purposes of music, which was about positioning the sales of something else. The reality is, for the most part, the audience is consuming streaming music for free or close to free from their perspective. And the financial equivalent of what comes to you on the back end of that, unless I'm doing this at scale, is very difficult. So thinking about just the music at its core as a product for digital purposes can be a little challenging. Labels used to think about touring for the purposes of selling a record. Now we think about selling a record or releasing a record to sell tickets for touring. And what happens if we talk not about touring, but we talk about other things in our universe? And so when we see artists that diversify into products like podcasting or like live streaming or maybe NFTs, in this scenario, they're primarily leveraging the release of music to bring people into their funnel and then offer them something that has potentially an additional product. So we've talked in the past about the Jessie Ware podcast. She didn't start this podcast because she said, I really need to make a lot more money. This wasn't the goal. She started a podcast because it was an extension to allow her audience to connect more deeply with her. But what she realized pretty quickly is there's a giant audience of people that want that level of access. And then advertisers came along with the demand and the desire for that access. And then that podcast actually became a pretty relevant revenue stream. And what she talks about in this podcast has very little to do with music. It's actually more about cooking and the joy of kind of sharing in something together. And yes, artists are participating, but it's inviting people into her world. It's helping her build her universe. And oh, by the way, it's a product that's generating revenue for her. I mean, I think just the idea of selling yourself as an artist feels uncomfortable for most artists, right? There's the amount of artists that I hear say, well, I just want to make my music. It's like, okay, I understand, but we're to a point that we're at 100,000 releases probably by the end of this year a day coming out. So there's a lot of product on the shelves if that's how you're trying to compete. And the reality is you have to think about the audience that is going to receive your product that you sell on the other end of that, and think about what you're trying to achieve. Because in the end, if there aren't financial goals to your career, then it's not really a career. It's a hobby. It's a passion. And that's also okay. Like, if this is your interest, is to make the music that you love to make, and just, I want to put it out there and I want to see if there's an audience, that's fine. But that's not really a business. That's just sort of like shooting an arrow into the sky and hoping that it hits something that you're trying to hunt. There is still a demand or a need in the marketplace to release content with frequency if you're trying to fill your funnel, if you want to bring people into your world. But in order to create demand with your audience, that does not mean you need to be giving them something every week. They're already getting lots of different things every week. You can create excitement, you can create hype, you can create drama around something that is coming. And that doesn't just have to be in the format of a single, an EP, or an album. That can be in the format of a remix. That could be in the format of stems. That could be in the format of, whatever other type of digital content you want to create. And in particular, the more demand you create on something, the more I would think about the financial piece of that puzzle. Like, if I can create a high level of demand, then people want it so bad that they're willing to pay for it. The stuff that has lower demand, maybe that's the stuff that I'm willing to put in front of the paywall so that I can make sure people can get access to me and engage with me as an artist. A local community of artists that you are really connected to. I think the idea of scenes is a really valuable asset, because we collectively could invest in trying things together, or maybe we're going to support each other in the promotion of what each other is doing, because this artist is going to try this new hoodie campaign that they're trying, and we're going to sort of like support them in doing that because we're validating that for ourselves. We're trying to see if that's possible for us. So they're going to drop their sweatshirt this month, and we're going to drop our sweatshirt in 2 months, so that we know we share fans. We know there's overlap, but like we're going to take a photo as an artist of wearing that band's shirt. And then in 2 months' time, they're going to take a photo of wearing our sweatshirt. There's such a fear to like open yourself up to interact with the fans and give them, a look behind the curtain. That there's a really good book by Austin Kleon called Show Your Work that talks about this fear that like an artist is the only person who values the process. The consumer is the person who values the product. And I think we're at a place today where that's not the case. I think if you don't have an understanding or a perspective into the process of an artist, you value the product less. And so the audience wants to be a part of that journey. They want to know when we're in the studio. They want to kind of hear or see how things are going and be a part of that experience together. And if you bring them along that journey, the willingness for them to purchase, if you drop the album on physical before you drop the album on digital, the people who have been along that whole journey are probably likely to buy it because they want to hear it before anyone else.